Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mike Pesca to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone. October 7th, 2023 was the deadliest day in Jewish history since the Holocaust. You've all heard that. That's exactly how Joe Biden said it, quote, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. I fixated on that. Since the Holocaust. When exactly? What day does that mean? The Holocaust lasted a long time. After 9/11 here in this country, we knew what we meant when we said the bloodiest day since, and in that case, it was the Battle of Antietam, September 17th, 1862. We knew that 3,600 had been killed. Some people say, if you want to think beyond battles, there was the hurricane in Galveston, Texas, 1900, 6,000 to 8,000 killed. But the point is, we knew the dates. We have the records, we have buildings to store the documents, we have civil servants taking notes, writing down the numbers in ink, locking away the figures. We were not a people trying to ease our way out of an incomprehensible horror. And now we're not trying to get our heads around a newfound horror by using a phantom reference point. We navigate on instruments set to a point that can't be fixed. So I tried to figure it out. I tried to figure out what was the other date as we did the bookkeeping, as we tried to bookend October 7th inside the concept of the bloodiest day since the Holocaust. So the Nazis gained power in 1933, Kristallnacht in 1938. The final solution is formalized and finalized in 1942. By the way, in that year, 1942, 15,000 Jews a day are killed between May and October. But that wasn't the end. Far from it. So when we're talking about since the Holocaust, when was the end? The Soviets liberate Auschwitz January 27th, 1945. By mid-April, the U.S. liberates Buchenwald, and then Dachau. Bergen-Belsen is actually liberated by the British, April 1945. But it doesn't end then because of the 60,000 people found alive in Bergen-Belsen, 13,000 of them do not live more than a few weeks. It's literally unknown. We can't put a date. We can't say, oh, this was the last day that 1,000 Jews died. This was the day after which 1,200 Jews stopped dying every day, stopped being murdered. Whenever that date was, when we say since the Holocaust, someday in 1945, there is no one date of since the Holocaust. Why do I bring it up? I think you could figure it out because the exercise itself tells us something, that we're trying to give definitive context to October 7th, and the answer eludes us. In the failed attempt, we get an explanation for the existence of the state of Israel. Israel exists as a tangible answer to the unanswerable. The horrors of the past may be incalculable. We can make an effort to limit them in the future. Israel is the Jews' effort. It's America's effort. It should be the world's effort. Israel stands and exists, so unlike what has been the pattern for millennia, Jews will not be killed. Remember that the idea that Israel was formed on, Zionism, that idea gave birth to Israel, was born into being in the 19th century. When Theodor Herzl advocated for Zionism, some objected on practical grounds, some objected on theological grounds, Jews among them. But no one could gainsay the idea that the world then, in the 1800s, was anything close to safe for the Jews. It was a ridiculous argument in the 1800s. And that was decades before you would ever see headlines like this in the American press. Jews here demand the end of massacres. But the thing is, that headline is from the New York Herald, May 22nd, 1919. A peremptory demand that the United States and other allied nations represented at the peace conference in Paris take steps to terminate abruptly massacres of Jews in Poland, Romania, and other sections of Eastern Europe. After massacres in 1919 in Poland, 28,000 people, mostly Jews in Boston, take to the streets. They demand answers from their American government. 10,000 in St. Louis, many tens of thousands in New York City. 18,000 of them go to Madison Square Garden to hear speeches. New York City was begging Woodrow Wilson to do something about the slaughter of the Jews in 1919, over 100 years ago. They congregate, and you could probably understand this impulse to get together and to try to understand reports of massacres from a foreign land. I'll read you again from the coverage at the time. As Madison Square Garden was full, quote, "Grimness was the dominant note in this strangest of demonstrations. Grimness and what seemed almost a pathetic reliance on the spirit of America to right the wrongs which were being protested." May 1919. Cut to September 1919. Ukrainian Jews aim to stop pogroms. Mass meeting hears that 127,000 Jews have been killed. In September of 1919, President Wilson is quoted, quote, "We come out now before the world with the determined slogan, 'Those pogroms must be stopped,'" said the president. "It is only a question of holding these facts continually before the civilized world. We must not permit the world to slumber." The mass slaughter of Jews was front-page news and a scourge of American politics and a request of the American president. He's inveighing against it. In 1919, he's essentially saying never again, at a time before the Nazi Party was born, when the word Holocaust only shows up in dictionaries defined as a burnt offering. You get the point, right? You understand. I say there have been two great innovations in the impossible task of pogrom abatement. One of those developments was Israel, and the other was the United States. As an American, I look at Israel as an imperfect, yet profound solution to one of history's most vexing problems: how to keep Jews from being murdered, because beforehand, nothing else could. As a Jew, I do not and have never thought much of Israel in terms of my, quote, identity. To me, the words most applicable to Israel aren't words like holy or promised or sacred. The word was necessary. If you value saving the lives of people who have proved among the most difficult to save, yes, they are my people, but also they are people. So I wanted to say all of that to lay the predicate as best I could to tell you about a trip I made to Israel recently. I was invited by my friend Jeff Feig. He was bringing 12 people with him, all American Jews except one. These people were feeling shaken, unmoored, and at a loss. And the plan was just to learn, to connect, to bear witness. And for some reason, he thought a podcaster might be a nice addition. Specifically that guy. I jumped at the chance. My wife jumped at my jumping. Safety assurances were made to her. If I'm being honest, safety assurances were not believed, but we flew to Israel anyway. It was my first trip there. So of course, Amen.
Kiss the floor, baby.
It tasted like chicken. We were in the country for about 60 hours. I didn't know it, but I would get 9 hours sleep during that time. We traveled, we talked. I filed from my hotel room at 3 or 4 in the morning. The itinerary was ambitious. The first speaker we heard from was Noam T-Bone. Noam T-Bone is a 62-year-old retired general. He may be the most respected person in Israel right now. He led troops into battle in Lebanon, but he is renowned for what he did on October 7th. Maybe you saw this on 60 Minutes. So T-Bone's swimming in the Mediterranean Sea in the morning with his wife, Gally. He hears the sirens go off. This happens all the time. We're safe out here in the sea. He gets to shore and he looks at his phone and he sees what's going on. His son, Amir, his daughter-in-law's 2 grandchildren, are in a safe room. They live in what's called the Gaza envelope. This is the area about 5 miles within the border of Gaza. And father says to son, I'm coming to save you. So he and his wife get in their car and they drive the about 70 miles from Tel Aviv down there to his kibbutz. Along the way, they're driving, they're getting close. Out from the side of the road, 2, turns out, Israelis run towards them. And it turns out these are 2 survivors from the Nova Festival. They had no idea what had happened. They save these people. They bring them to safety. They continue on their way. T-Bone picks up a soldier who wants to help the family. Now they're getting closer. Now they're about 5 minutes away, and a firefight is right in front of them. Terrorists against Israelis. 2 Israelis are already dead. T-Bone grabs one of the dead soldiers' M16. He and the remaining soldiers kill all the terrorists. The living soldier says, I know you. I want to come with you. They put the wounded Israelis in their car, take them to medical attention, and then they continue on. They're getting closer and closer still. He encounters, this is amazing, this is all amazing, another general, a guy named Israel Ziv. This guy's older than T-Bone. He did something like what T-Bone did. He puts on his uniform, he drives south, he just wants to help. Get in the car. These 2 retired generals, this Israeli soldier, get to the kibbutz, Nahal Oz. Their paratroopers are at the gates. T-Bone and the paratroopers concoct a plan. The paratroopers join him on his mission. The general will take it from there in an interview with NBC's Lester Holt.
We started to go apartment by apartment, house by house, and search for terrorists. There were bodies of terrorists in the kibbutz. The paratroopers killed another 6 terrorists. And when I came to the area of my son's house, there were at least 5 bodies of terrorists and Israeli soldier, a brave Israeli soldier, killed in this region.
What gave you hope that your son and his family would still be alive?
Amir told me, because I told him, you have to be quiet, you have to be locked, trust me, I will come. And he knew that I will come.
And he did come. Grandfather is here. He tells the girls and he saves them. Now, at this point, I want to pivot to the son, Amir Taban. He's a biographer. He's a journalist for Haaretz. He did an interview with The Atlantic, and Amir reflected on what he was asking for in that moment. Quote, okay, right now, I'm asking my 2 young daughters to put complete faith in me and my wife, in their parents, to do what we're telling them in order to save their lives, which is to be very, very quiet and to understand that we cannot get out of the room, we cannot get food, we cannot go to the bathroom, we cannot go out and play. I'm asking them to put their faith in me completely. And I told myself, I have to do the same thing right now. I have to trust my father, who is a trustworthy man, that if he said he will come and save us, he will do it. And I thought to myself, well, that's one family-specific story, like something out of a Liam Neeson movie. But it's also the story of Israel. One generation trusts the last, knowing they have built this for us. Then they do depend on what their fathers and mothers have made, and then the adult children turn to their own children, and they have no choice but to trust them too. To me, this is so foreign from my observations of America. Sometimes, I don't know, 1st or 2nd generation immigrants here in America have this mindset, but mostly we take generations for granted. We invent memes to insult the last one and names to diminish the next one. What challenges do we intergenerationally bequeath in America? We try to remember to invest in a 401k. Oh, you didn't? That's too bad. Oh, you did? Remember to feel guilty about your privilege. It's not like that in Israel. In Israel, the sacrifices are real. They're felt. There is no assumed prosperity. There is no assumed safety. There shouldn't be. Maybe in this moment, the idea of Israeli interdependence even echoes out from Israel to the rest of the Jewish diaspora. The Israelis are saying to the rest of us, maybe if you hear and listen closely, we're trusting you, even if you're not of this land. You have to understand what it means. Noam Tibon wanted to tell us one thing more. Like I said, he's in demand. He has many speaking engagements. But before he left, he said, I need you to, and this is a guy whose profession is to protect his family and his country and his people from terror, and he couldn't be more dedicated to winning this war that's going on. But he said, I have to run, but you have to know something. I have limited time. Know that once this war is over and Israel has won, Netanyahu must go. There can be no exceptions to this. And when we were on this trip, we heard this sentiment over and over again. Soon thereafter, we met Nadav Argaman, who is the former head of Shin Bet, Israel's security services. I cannot bring you tape of him. He was the only official who asked that our cell phones be collected so that his remarks weren't recorded. Like I said, Shin Bet. But I can report to you the sentiment. He explained the failures of October 7th in 3 parts. 1, concepzia, the failure to conceptualize what was going on. Israel was operating under a false concept of who Hamas was and what they wanted. 2 was avoidance. And 3 was strife within the country. Now, to go back for a second to this concept of concepzia, I don't just like saying it because it's a Hebrew word I can come close to pronouncing correctly. But it's widely reported, it's well known in Israel. Why did Israel have so much trouble and was so surprised in 1973, failure of concepzia? Because they didn't think the Arabs would do it. They couldn't conceptualize what the Arab states were up to. And this just came up. I've not seen the word associated with the coverage, but I bet you all read the story in the New York Times, and the Guardian did other coverage of it, that these analysts saw what Hamas was doing. They assembled the reports. They passed the reports up to their superiors. And their superiors said, oh no, Hamas wouldn't dare. Even if they would dare, they don't have the capacity. No, it was a failure of concepzia. Now on that 3rd point, remember there was avoidance and there was Israel being this fractious country. There was so much strife over the plan to overhaul the judicial system, which I'm sure many of you were following and know about. But I asked him, okay, you have a country, there's internal strife. What's the answer for that so you don't get attacked? Is the answer is, okay, the left just has to give in? Is the answer, no, the right just has to give in? Is the answer just, well, you have a civic debate, it has real stakes, it has real passion, you just somehow have to avoid this. In this, the only democracy for 500 miles in one direction and 3,000 miles in another. You have an answer for fractiousness? I'd like to know as an American. And he said, no, I understand what you're saying. I understand your point. But my answer is this, that one man, Benjamin Netanyahu, shouldn't try to warp society around his political vision, shouldn't try to press his advantages, shouldn't put us in this position. Now, it might surprise you, okay, government official calling out his former boss. I mean, this is why he is a former government official. He left office because of his disagreement with Netanyahu over this plan. But it is such a stark contrast between what's going on in Israel now and what went on in America after 9/11. After 9/11, George W. Bush's popularity, of course, soared through the roof. In Israel today, just like in the USA, the country was totally behind the war effort, but there is a huge divergence in the faith that each electorate has in the man who is leading that effort. And this brings me to Gigi Weiss-Levy and his organization. It is now called Brothers and Sisters for Israel. It was originally called Brothers in Arms. It was the premier protest group during this fractious spat over judicial reform, judicial overhaul. Sometimes if you'd say reform, the people against it would say, I don't like that word. Weiss-Levy was a reservist. He flew helicopters. This has great status in Israel society. And he was firmly against what they were trying to do with the judiciary. And his argument, the arguments of people like him were, I serve in the military because it is the military of a great democracy. If you go ahead with these reforms, it will cease to be a democracy, and I won't serve. It's shocking, but it underscored their conviction. And then what happened? October 7th, and immediately the actual war reveals that the quote-unquote warring factions within Israel, they weren't bluffing, they weren't insincere, but what they were was truly patriotic. They were willing, without hesitation, to put aside their differences and to start working together for the common good. There wasn't even a question about it. So what did that mean? Well, in Israel, civic bonds are strong and government bonds are weak. So a charitable organization has to step into the breach. Couple examples. Israel's mobilizing 350,000 troops. So we understand that that means 350,000 troops will go and fight. But how do you get the soldiers there? You have to bring them to the front. Brothers and Sisters in Arms, now Brothers and Sisters for Israel, arranged for 8,000 rides. There are homeless all over Israel. People near the north, near Lebanon, near Gaza. There are whole kibbutzes, kibbutzim, living in hotels. You have to deliver people food. And what they explained is it's not just delivering the meals, it's a person delivering the meals, talking to whoever is displaced, treating them the way they would want to be treated. We toured their organization. I came away thinking it was the glue that it didn't just augment the mobilization, it made the effort possible. And for us, after meeting a few people, talking to some experts, seeing the whole country come together, a picture began to emerge. It was a serious, coherent, focused country. It was a country whose people were stronger than their government, and a country ready to take care of business and to take care of each other. The next day, we visited the Gaza envelope. Gaza envelope, like I said, is an area within 5 miles of Gaza. You know, they express it in kilometers. It's really 4.5. The people here are easily within the range of Hamas mortars and rockets, as this display case show. I don't know if you can see that, but it's a Qassam rocket and another rocket. They come down frequently. They keep a collection of these rockets in Sderot. And now I already brought you the story from Nechel Oz. That was where General Tibon saved his family. Sderot we went to, saw the rockets. And then there is Zakim. Zakim is not a kibbutz. It's an army base. In Israel, so you should know, in Israel, almost every citizen serves in the army. And on Friday night, Shabbat dinner, Sabbath on a base can be really lonely. The soldiers are young. They might be away from home for the first time. There's not much to do except maybe think about the comforts of home. So there's this program where Israeli families the whole family will go to an army base and have Shabbat dinner with the military. Now, I've heard some people in Israel say, I don't love this. It's intermingling of compulsory military service and religion. I've heard other people say it's wonderful. It shows what makes Israel a country. It extends the bonds of family. But what I did hear from was a woman named Michal Ilan. And on October 7th, Michal Ilan, her husband, and her 8 children, yes, 8 children. She has 10 children, 2 are married, so she only brings the 8 that are at home with her. They go to this army base, Zakim base. It's Shabbat dinner. She brings Shabbat to the army base, and then Hamas brings its violence to them. As you can see, Zakim is right across the border. It's closer than even Sderot or Kibbutz Be'eri, which you're going to hear about. And our nurse, Michal, is there on a Friday night, and she hears that a female soldier is hurt. And her children say, Mommy, you're a nurse. Help her. And so she goes to help her, and she hears that this soldier has fallen from a lookout tower. That's Michal, who you're looking at. And she hears that this female soldier is badly wounded. She starts to tend to her. She knows that it's worse than a fall from a tower. She later finds out the soldier has been shot through the face the entire time that she's working to save the soldier's life. She didn't know that. She's tending to the wounded, and it's apparent to her that something else is going on. She hears noise. She hears gunfire. I recorded Michal. She picks up her own story from there.
All the time I heard shooting and bombing, and I thought, okay, the soldiers are doing what they have to do, but we're okay. And rockets, but suddenly there was really loud shooting, and the soldier, sorry, this is fine. The soldier that was standing at the entrance of the room just fell into the room. He was guarding us. He fell into the room, and he was full of blood in his head. He was shot in the head. And the soldier next to me asked me, "Can't we help him?" I said, "We can't. I think he's dead. I think we lost him." Then came another soldier to the entrance. And I was happy. I thought he was coming to help. But then I looked at him, and his uniform looked a little bit different. And when I rose my head, I looked at his face. He was older. He wasn't so young as all the soldiers. And then I understood, very slowly, only then I understood that he's a terrorist. It was seconds. He looked at me in the eye for a second, and he just rose up his rifle, and he shot me. He shot me 3 shots in my stomach here under, and my chest, and my hand. And I knew I was bleeding very hard. So I took off my mitbachat, and I did myself a tourniquet. Not so strong, but as strong as I could.
It was strong enough. She tells her husband, press, keep the wounds from overflowing. She survives. We met her at Hadassah Hospital. She's doing rehab. She's getting more surgery. In a way, she is lucky to have survived that, as horrible as it is to have been through it. The kibbutz in the Gaza envelope that suffered the worst attack of October 7th was Kibbutz Be'eri. We go there. We're greeted by Chaim Yellen. He is a leader of the kibbutz. He's a major figure in this region. He was a former head of the regional council that governs the Gaza envelope. He would go on to be elected to the Knesset, Israel's parliament. This was the first tour he gave, and he began by telling us of his usual morning routine.
קם, שם שעון ללכת ואני רץ.
6 a.m. Every day I'm jogging on Shabbat.
והייתי עייף מהטיסה, אז
I was
אמרתי
tired
נשים
from the flight from
ב-6:30.
Australia, so I said, okay, it will be
6:30.
6:30 instead of 6.
מי שיצא לרכב ולעשות ספורט בשעה 6 לא חזר.
The people who went on 6 a.m., all of them in the kibbutz didn't come back.
6:31 אני שומע את הטילים, יוצאים
6:31, I hear
לתל
the
אביב.
missiles on their way to Tel Aviv.
So the night before this, the whole kibbutz had gathered to celebrate their community's anniversary. It was hundreds of people celebrating this place, which predates the founding of the State of Israel. Against all odds, from that moment, the community survived, the community grew, and the next morning, we'll hand this over to a video that members of the kibbutz put together.
6:30 in the morning. We woke up to strange noises. Hundreds of terrorists infiltrated our kibbutz, slaughtering us, setting us on fire. Elderly women and babies kidnapped. Unimaginable horrors. In one moment, our heaven turned into a living hell.
Chaim Yellen took us through the destruction. He points us down one row of houses. Every other one had been burned. He then gestures to where a family of 3 was killed, another where a family of 4 died. He talked about how he and his family were in a safe room. So there he is. He is in touch with the other members of his kibbutz, many of the other members. They're all on WhatsApp together. And he sees their desperation playing out before him. But he knows if he leaves, he'll be killed. So he can't leave, but he also can't save them. And he is plainly tortured by this fact.
וחוסר אונים של...
It's feeling
זה סוג
helpless
של השפלה
that is
בעצם.
so humiliating.
Helpless is humiliating. The way safe rooms work is that they're built to withstand rocket attacks. They're not built to necessarily withstand armed terrorists. There are reports of fathers putting their backs against the doors of safe rooms, absorbing the bullets so they don't reach their families. You hope the locks hold. But the terrorists know this, and they bring with them lighter fluid and they drag tires. And their plan, which they execute, is to smoke the families out. On certain blocks, every single home is burned. The communities there are named for agricultural products like olive and vineyard. And those were the sites, those two specifically, were the sites of the most destruction and the most death. Yalin takes us to the home of one family who he was especially close to, a mother, a father, 4 children. I'll play some of my report, which aired on The Gist. We'll see a little bit inside that house, a little bit of the yard outside. As a reminder, you could listen to how close we are to Gaza. You could listen, I think you could pick up some sounds of the shelling in the background. This runs a little under 2 minutes.
Most of the people who were killed and were taken hostage were taken from here, from this street.
We step into the front yard of a charred home. The footsteps resonate on tile now strewn all over the yard. The roof was blown off when fire was set to the home and the interior exploded from the heat and built up gases.
I brought you to this home because Rinat and Chen, Rinat was the mother. She worked with me. 8 years she was in the welfare department of the regional council. And Chen, her son, was a child, a wild child that I raised up here.
Yulim explains that he, in his safe room, was getting messages from the family who lived in this house. Help! Terrorists are attacking us. But what could he do, he asks. If he left his house, he'd be slaughtered. The family in this house had a similar choice. They fled the smoke and ran to the backyard. The family consisted of 4 children and 2 parents.
The older brother, 16, jumped on his little brother. And the mother on the other child. And the only children who survived are these children that the mother and the brother, the older brother, protected. Above what was the family mantle in the charred remains of this home, Chaim showed us the most amazing thing. It was originally a tile or stone mosaic artwork, and it was burned away in the fire, but because it was stone, an outline remained, and you could make out a picture of a family holding each other. It is the last discernible image in this family's home. It is ghostly, and this is a picture of the Evan family. Only the youngest 2 survive. At this point, I would like to bring up, well, with me today are at least half a dozen of the people who are on that trip with me, and I'd like to bring up one of them named Elefant, who became a confidant and a source of great insight. Eli served in the Israel Defense Forces from 96 to 2002. He was a special forces officer. He fought in southern Lebanon in the late 1990s and during the Second Intifada of 2000, and along the way trained various U.S. forces before and after 9/11. He's now an American, living with an American wife and American kids in New York City, CEO of the Israeli firm Property and Building Corps' U.S. division, and he does a lot of work and charity work with the Iraq and Afghan Veterans of America, IAVA. He has been in the fight. He knows the terrain better than most. Eli, are you out there? Come on up. Oh, there it is. So I'll tell you a little bit of how it would work between us. a general would talk to us, and then I'd check in with Ellie, and he'd check in with me, and he'd say, "What do you think?" And I'd say, "What do you think?" And I noticed a strain of, in order to gain credibility, you had to at least admit to some of your failings. That's how it works with you, I think. Here. Thanks.
Work that way with everyone?
That should, right?
It should.
Yeah.
Accountability.
Thanks for doing this. So right now, what's going on in southern Israel is the IDF, well, first of all, is clearing the north and perhaps, taking the fight to Khan Yunis. Will it be different? Because I've heard reporting that the Americans have given the Israelis the message that they have to take more care. They have to go slower, even if this means more risk, just because we can't have that level of civilian casualty. Is that how you interpret things?
I think, first of all, the Americans probably gave Israel, the statement, your credit line is coming to an end, or it's shorter than you think it is. The fight in the north was probably based less on intelligence and was certainly easier because those are also the distant battalions from kind of the hornet's nest. The fights in the south will be more difficult, and they are going slower, but they also are going harder in certain ways. We know more. There's more intelligence as you capture more combatants. There's a lot more knowledge that we have of the terrain now, and everyone has kind of been in it for a while. So it certainly will intensify. I mean, yesterday saw 7 dead soldiers. Mm-hmm. We've had 3. I don't know what an acceptable number is, but we've had a typical of 3 a day pre-ceasefire.
Yeah, the total's about 86 now.
Yeah, so it's gotten more intense, but there are also more successes. Right, there's a lot more intelligence involved. There's a lot more information, and the techniques are changing. I don't know if we flooded the tunnels yesterday. Right, I don't know how effective that is. I think it's probably more of a a stunt, essentially a message, or you saw a visual that can be shared, and then maybe they pop out of some of the tunnels. But a lot of those tactics are being used, and I think to that extent, also a lot of what you read specifically in war is often very purposely, is often very as a diversion in some cases, right? No one's giving out exact information.
When we talked to a prominent member of the Knesset, he used the phrase the war clock, which is not a concept that he invented. The idea is you will exhaust the patience of the West, the United States. How acutely felt is that within Israel?
I don't think, I think Israel's very across the board, right? Politically and socially. The entire country is in unity on winning.
Yes.
Right? What that is, it's a different conversation. But there's a very high conviction on victory as long as it takes. And everyone says as long as it takes, right? We are going to ignore international calls to stop or to cease fire, to negotiate. We're going to be at this as long as it takes. What that actually means, can Hamas be fully dismantled? Can an ideology be... we take away a lot of their means, but that's a question. Look, we sat with generals that said 8 to 9 months tactically of resolving, getting everywhere we need to get and making sure that we are safe. Units today are being released and told they're on call for March, right? Guys that have fought for 2 months are now leaving, and they're going to be recycled back in March. So Israel is certainly prepared for a very long-term war here.
So from what has been reported, 6,000 Hamas fighters have been killed. How accurate is that? How many have been captured? What kind of calculation should we make against the denominator of a supposed 30,000 large fighting force?
Yeah, I don't know. The numbers are kind of interesting. It depends who you ask, right? Because I saw that the Gaza Health Ministry, controlled and run by Hamas, reported that 15,256 civilians have been killed, but not a single Hamas fighter has been killed, right, according to their reports.
Terrible aim.
So there are a lot of... So I think what Israel knows right now is that about 25% of Hamas fighters are not captured, but are gone, right? We probably have 1,500 Hamas captives. Many of which were on October 7th, part of the massacre. And it's unclear how many forces are left. We know battalions are gone. We know divisions are gone, right? And there's a very concentrated effort at getting rid of the battalion commanders, the division commanders, right? Guys we know, leaders. And once you get rid of them, their people disperse and kind of operate as cells. They're much easier to take out. But 25% of Hamas's forces have been dismantled at this point, and their abilities are severely impacted.
So the idea or goal of, sometimes you'll hear an official say destroying, but mostly they'll say something like dismantling, which evokes less of a total uprooting of the organization. How realistic is that? Is there a number that once half of them are gone, you could consider that no longer a viable fighting force?
Look, they're going to fight till the last man. There's no, I don't think Hamas, and I think it's interesting because, right, going on this trip, reliving it now, watching you here is very difficult. But it was one of the first trips I think that was done in solidarity pre the ceasefire. To hear?
Yes.
I've
just been handed this notice.
That's good. It's a good thing. I'll get off.
That was subtle.
No, subtle. Look, I don't know how you fight. This enemy is a very different enemy, right? The U.S. has not fought an enemy like this. A city, Gaza could only be maybe compared to Mosul, maybe. It's a very difficult enemy. It's rooted in politics. They're rooted in the schools, the ambulances, the hospitals. Very difficult enemy, very difficult ideology to fight. And I don't think they even had the initially, no one thought they didn't even think they were going to be this successful.
They did not.
They had no idea. They were going to, sure, they had maps. They thought they were going to get to Jerusalem, but that's what you tell their soldiers. Like, you guys are going to Jerusalem, right? Then thinking that they're going to make it, 10 feet past the fence.
And I think they had no great plan afterwards.
No, they didn't. They didn't have and a lot of the stuff was entrepreneurial, so to speak. Let's take back as many people as we can, right? I don't think if Sinwar had to actually think about what he was doing, it was like, guys, don't bring back the women and the children. Probably not a great look for us, right? Had he had that foresight, I think he wouldn't be in this predicament today. But thankfully, to a certain extent, they are Hamas. So I don't know how difficult it is to eradicate, how challenging. I don't know how easy it is to eradicate it, and how much, and if they will last as a different idea, as a different faction, etc. Israel is committed to their destruction and the complete removal of this ideology under whatever brand it is, right? Because you talked about the conceptia. I think Israel's already at this point at a stage where it understands that if your neighbor across the fence keeps saying, hey, I'm going to kill you, hey, I'm going to kill you, at one point you actually have to do something about it and not just sit there and say, no, he's deterred. He's deterred because he knows I have a shotgun, right? Doesn't really, I think Israel's figured out at this point that this can't ever happen again. And it's doing the same thing, by the way, in southern Lebanon. Today, the first time, the General Chief of Staff said, we will move Hezbollah to the Litani. That's about 15 miles north of where Hezbollah is right now, right on our fences. Right, we are going to push back Hezbollah past the Litani. How? I don't know if it's military. I don't know if it's a political move, but that is the objective.
What about this idea, for every insurgent you kill, and American commanders would say this, you create two more. And it seems on a human level to make sense, the hatred you engender. On another level, though, logically, it would argue that in the history of insurgency, they've all been successful because they've all been able to exponentially multiply. How much do you buy into that?
Oh, I buy into it. There is no doubt that what they're being taught from zero and how they behave. Look, one of the hostages was held by an UNRWA school teacher who has 10 kids in his house, locked in a room or an attic. And
United Nations,
right? And there's a teacher in the United Nations school. This is rooted in society. There are 1.9 million Palestinians, Gazans living in there. It's a very big challenge, which is why I think the international community is going to have to be heavily involved anything here.
We were told often about the unpopularity of Netanyahu, and I think probably Likud, this was before the polls came out, the last I saw showed that his popularity would be cut in half, and of course, as is mostly the case, he had to have a coalition government to get power. Anyway, so it would argue that his days after this is over is numbered. Where do you think politics are going in Israel?
I would hope towards unity, a lot more unity. I think everyone certainly has seen the 40 weeks of strife and the judicial reform that had occurred as not a catalyst, but as a factor in this. I think different people will have different opinions on that, but certainly Israel needs to unify and remind itself or remember the jungle they live in and that they're surrounded by. And that's certainly something we've forgotten in Israel. To a certain extent, Jews in the United States have forgotten that too. But Israeli politics will all meet in the center. We heard from Noam T-Bone. We used to be a member of the most extreme left-wing party in Israel. He said there is no left anymore, right? Everyone, at least on these topics, on these issues. Nobody wants anything to do with Gaza. No one wants to. We used to have 39,000 workers coming from Gaza every day. Everyone wants a complete detachment on the day after. We'll see how that plays out. Netanyahu will not be prime minister for much longer. There are groups that think he should step down now. I think it's kind of interesting if they were able to oust him now, there would be kind of a very interesting government, almost like a shadow general government, which to a certain extent could be viewed as a government that could withstand the international community and say, guys, leave us alone. We're not here we're here to finish the job and we'll talk to you.
So you're saying you could argue it might put Israel in a stronger position.
There is a faction in Israel that says we need Netanyahu gone and we need a war government, and that war government should not consist of an individual who has to constantly think about the day after, because on the day after he's going to be indicted, and he's already indicted, right? And the day after there's going to be a lot to deal with when it comes to Netanyahu. He's not safe in that sense. But there are also people like Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett was a prime minister for a very short period of time. I think it was the right government at the wrong time, and I would hope that a government like that shows up again, which is a unity government. He reached left, he reached right. The Israeli Arabs were in his coalition. I would hope that that's the direction Israel goes.
Last question. What's your assessment of the hostage exchange? It needed to be done, I think, for humanitarian reasons. What about strategically? Did it set the military mission back much?
No. I mean, from a military standpoint, anything that could be gained in a ceasefire was gained. Intelligence, allowing them to get out of the tunnels and kind of make cell phone calls was helpful. The exchange of wars really a bad thing, right? Across the board, on both sides, terrible thing, and it's the choice of a lesser of two evils, specifically the Jewish values. You have to get your hostages out. Did we force? I mean, the hostage exchange. Our last hostage exchange was 1,100 for one, which Sinwar got out in. And here we kind of forced a 3 for 1. I think it's the lesser of many evils. And the fact that they were able to turn the war machine back on is a good indication that they have full intent to continue this.
Eli Elefant, thank you so much. So speaking of hostages, we did in fact meet families of hostages. They were out. We talked to some in the public squares of Tel Aviv. And we also talked to some specific families who had essentially taken over an office building and turned its operations from an advertising and marketing firm to a different kind of public information effort. They were working to get their family members released. Among them were Or and Daphna Sella. They were cousins. Their extended family was kidnapped or murdered from Kibbutz Be'eri. And they talked to us, and they sat, and they clicked a mouse, and we looked at images on a monitor in this bland corporate space where 2 months prior, the monitors might have been showing us, I don't know, fourth quarter projections or a product they were trying to get attention for. Now the screens were of people, their family members. They included a 67-year-old. They included a 3-year-old. Unexpectedly, and thanks to Ellie, we pulled in Yossi Cohen, who is the former head of Mossad, who had been conducting negotiations for the hostages' release. He was working with the Qataris. This is how it has to go in this situation. But as a contrast, I should mention that the head of Shin Bet, Nadav Argaman, he insisted the Qataris could not be trusted. He preferred to work with the Egyptians, much better intermediators, he said. But Cohen said, no, we're trying all the levers at our disposal. We will try to convince Hamas to deal. How do you do that? He said it's very important for Israel to keep winning militarily. The more military success they have, the more impetus there was for Hamas to trade and take a break in fighting. And that assessment proved actually prophetic. Another angle that he emphasized is that, and this is accurate, many of the hostages hold 2 passports, and we can impress upon the Qataris how it would be in their interest and Hamas' interest to release those who hold passports outside of Israel. Now, at this point, Or Sella interrupts. That, all the way on the far right, that is Or Sella, a guy with the blonde hair. He's a music producer. 3 weeks prior, or a few weeks prior, he's sitting on a beach on vacation somewhere. He hears about an attack in Israel. Then he hears it's his family that's being murdered, that's being dragged across the border. And now he's sitting in a room with the former head of Mossad negotiating for his relatives' lives. And he interrupts this pretty cool assessment and says, and I remember looking at him, and his eyes are kind of darting around in his head. And I say to myself, this is a guy who can't believe where he is. And what he says to the former head of Mossad is, I'm not a political guy, but when you speak about human beings, regardless of their nationality, it could resonate because every human being is a human being. And Yossi Cohen, clear-eyed, sort of cool-blooded head of Mossad, nods and said, oh yes, of course, everything. We will use any argument that could possibly work. Or sell his relative. So you have to realize the psychographics of people who lived in Kibbutz Be'eri. They're peaceniks. They're people who believed in bridging divides and achieving peace with Palestinians. And they would bring Palestinians over to work in their fields and bring them over to their homes, Palestinians from Gaza. And now so many of the residents of Kibbutz Be'eri are in the hands of Palestinians from Gaza. At this meeting, we also meet Ilay David. His brother is Evatar, a Nova Festival goer, a civilian. He pleaded with us, with anyone who would listen, for his brother Evatar's life. In our visit, we go to the foreign ministry, we visit the Knesset, we visit the morgue where the bodies are taken. There, we're told, yes, people there saw the beheaded bodies of children. There is, at this point, a line between how much horror I can try to communicate to you versus how much you can bear. It's a decision that I contemplate. It's a decision that Israel contemplates all the time. Too much horror, and the human mind defends itself by shutting off. Israel thinks about this in terms of its public diplomatic strategy. They have to be strategic, lest discrete examples of horrible inhumanity congeal into a kind of white noise of lamentation, and they begin to mean nothing. So this is why there's a debate about whether to let our group see the 47-minute video of Hamas atrocities. The two sides of this debate, generally speaking, the diplomats want us to. The IDF is reluctant because they feel that you show this more and more, it will just radicalize people. But many of us insist and plead, and we go to a screening that's actually held in the Knesset. And this movie is as horrible as anything you can imagine. To describe what it was would do a disservice. And what I mean by that is a little bit different from no words can describe what was on that film. You've probably read many words attempting and succeeding in describing what's on that film. But to me, the important thing is that each individual viewer will take away something a little bit different. So up to this point, I've been engaged mostly in reporting. There's been some analysis mixed in, some earned expertise maybe. We did a Q&A, but now I want to just segue into, let's call it the op-ed section of the show, because I reflected very heavily and I tried to be very fair about what I saw in this 47-minute video and what I saw the whole time there, as the video was just about the last thing that we were shown as a group. I did a full segment on the gist about the film, and one thing that just struck me and that I want to emphasize here is that I experienced revulsion on behalf of my Muslim friends, because I would see these terrorists time and time again invoking God and Allah as they pumped bullets into already dead bodies. I talked on the show about war films and cutting-edge editing, a Catherine Bigelow movie, Zero Dark 40, and the footage, the jangly cameras. It's kind of familiar. It does seem like something cinematic. But in this movie that we saw, there's no narrative spine. There's no grammar of cinema. You can't orient yourself to what you're seeing. And that is actually an accurate point, I think, that carnage like this is impossible to make sense of. So I was sort of glad they didn't make an effort to try to force that upon us. I tried to think of the films with maximum dispassion. I asked myself, well, couldn't, of course, a pro-Palestinian activist or humanitarian could put together the same kind of film about many civilians who are unfairly killed on their side of the war? Apparently, the task of convincing people is interpreted by many conveyors of information as, well, let's see how many bodies we could put into a frame of footage. How badly mangled are the bodies? If the answer to the question is, and whose bodies are they, is one side, then I guess the work of defining morality is to oppose the other side, that thinking goes. And, you know, if that's true, you could make that movie. I'm sure you could argue maybe that Al Jazeera and BBC are showing that movie every night. But then like I'm saying, maximum dispassion, or trying to be very fair. What if they showed this imagined film of Palestinians bearing the atrocities of war? Yeah, it would have truly horrible deaths. It would have sincere and heart-wrenching depictions of fear and depictions of sorrow. But would there be any difference, really? Would it just be one undifferentiated mass washing over you? And I do think there would be a difference. So for one thing, it just came across in this film, there is the glee, there is the exuberance, the joy in interpersonal slaughter that we saw over and over again. I think that would appall most people of the world, unless such a person was too far gone ideologically to begin with. When I thought of this, when Lieutenant Calley was perpetrating the My Lai massacre, did he call home to his parents? Did he say, I killed 10 with my bare hands? Did they respond to him, kill, kill, kill? Because that happened in the movies we saw. There are other differences. What if, after Abu Ghraib, the U.S. soldiers who perpetrated those abuses returned to their homes, their basements, and said, you can't touch us now. We're going to hide in the basements of Ashland, Kentucky, or Allegheny, Pennsylvania. Would the moral demands of justice conclude, well, let's just let them go? You've deployed a clever tactic. I guess efforts at accountability are hereby thwarted. And if we did that, would our Arab allies, or just any decent person in the world, think, yes, that was the right choice? Analogies are tough. I sometimes can't believe I make them, but my mind is drawn to them. And let's take the issue of human shields, which is the measure Hamas employs to endanger their own people in order to escape accountability. Let's say During the U.S. Civil War, Confederates snuck across the border and slaughtered men, women, children of the Union side, and then slunk back to the Confederacy. And let's say they then situated themselves in civilians' homes in Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania. Would General Grant and Sherman have said, well, you, the Army of the South, are hiding among the Southern people, and you put your guns to their heads? And by the way, these civilians might actually support you. It doesn't matter. You have embarked upon the cleverest, most undefeatable tactic there is. No, not only do I think that wouldn't happen, I know it wouldn't happen. That exact circumstance did happen. The Union laid siege to those cities. This is one of the ways the Confederacy was defeated. Here's another thought. After 9/11, Osama bin Laden listed his reasons. The TikTok teens of 2 weeks ago, notwithstanding, the whole world did not care. They dismissed them. In fact, I think they just ignored them. And why wouldn't they? No one engaged in the exercise of saying, well, Osama bin Laden does have his grievances. Let us now get into the context of those grievances. The UN Secretary General did not take time to instruct us on what Osama bin Laden was just so mad about. For some reason, on September 11th, there wasn't this great rush to say, but you must realize, 75 years earlier, FDR met with King Saud on the USS Quincy, and many of the things they decided greatly offend Osama bin Laden now. In order to understand the buildings coming down and the thousands of people dying, you have to understand that 75-year-old injustice. It would have, if someone said that, I think the answer would be yes, but that was 75 years ago. I say there are a couple ways to think about a 3/4 century old grievance, and it seems like the best way isn't the one that requires the purposeful targeting of thousands of innocent people. That's just me. It shouldn't be empathized with. And we don't even have to say this, right? Is it because what's changed since 2001, which obviated the need to say it then, but necessitates it now? Is that the media ecosystem changed so much? Is it that the United States was so much stronger than Israel that it would be a waste of time to get in those discussions? Maybe the independent variable is the Jews. That's what Dan Siener, other observers of anti-Semitism say. When two sets of remarkably similar circumstances arise, don't underestimate the role of anti-Semitism in describing or explaining why one gets punished and the other gets allowed. A country might be accused of oppressing a population, just about every country is, and then this country is attacked horrifically, and a decision is made to fight against the destruction, to protect the country's people. With one such country, there is a little muted criticism, maybe in niche journals or on Pacifica radio stations. With another country, now we see massive demonstrations the world over. I wouldn't totally look past anti-Semitism as the explanation. I have heard some thinkers, who I respect in many areas, Ezra Klein and others say, the world was so sympathetic with Israel on October 7th, just as it was sympathetic with the United States on September 11th. Isn't it a shame they wasted and frittered away that sympathy? I say yes, there is probably a very steep direct curve when the X and Y axis are victimhood and sympathy. To retain one, you can't give up the other. Each country realizes that staying in the good graces of some ill-informed people far away is not that valuable a commodity. Sympathy is fine, safety is better. Oh, and by the way, when Israel is attacked, again, to quote the words of Hamas leader Ghazi Hamad, a second time, a third time, a fourth time, think about how much more sympathy the world will have for Israel. Won't that be comforting then? I say it also bears stating that many countries have been in Israel's situation, containing a population that objects to their rule. I don't hear much discussion. How much should Nigeria be giving to Boko Haram? Why did Colombia even fight the FARC, or Peru, the guerrillas of the Shining Path, or Sri Lanka, the Tamil Tigers? Somewhere out there in America, there's definitely someone who looks at the Ethiopia-Tigray war, which cost 200,000 to 300,000 lives, and objected to Ethiopia and say bad 2019 Nobel Peace Prize winning president of Ethiopia. I know that person's out there. I just haven't heard that person. Ta-Nehisi Coates and Jamal Bowman, I've heard arguing that the situation of the Palestinians very much remind them of the situations of Black Americans in the era of Jim Crow, in the separate but unequal era. I think that I have some sympathy to this. From what I know of the Palestinians' plight, it is a plight and there is oppression. But here's the big difference. The SNCC or MLK or even Malcolm X never led an armed party to Boston or the communes of Berkeley and killed 1,000 people. I feel dangerous and almost offensive for having injected that idea, that hypothetical into the world. So like I say, argument by analogy just leads to frustration. But if any of that worked, or if any of the facts or points or images you've seen or heard sparked any recognition or insight in you, that's good. And there has been some good since my visit. Let me revert back to reporting mode, because I can, in fact, report that the 3-year-old you saw on the screen for a second, and Daphne Sella's cousin, the little girl with the curly hair that I showed you in that picture. Yes, that one. Remember her from the meeting? Well, here is Yahal Shoham 11 days ago. She, her brother, her mother were released. Her father is still being held by Hamas, as is every man, every old man, every civilian man, every young man, all of them. And as far as Elay David's brother, Evitar David, here is the last known picture of Evitar. After Chaim Yellen showed us his home and his neighbor's home and the husks and shells of what they've become, he told us why it was important for us to be there and for him to be there with us.
I
wanted to speak to my people here, to strengthen them, not outside, to people who live outside of here.
וכשהבנתי במשך הזמן אני גם צריך לדבר על היהדות בעולם.
But I realized that I do need to speak about the Jewish people outside of Israel and the diaspora.
קיבלתי את ההחלטה בעצם לארח אתכם פה.
So this is why I got the decision to host you here, something that I don't do ever.
ואני לא בטוח שאני אצליח לעשות את זה יותר.
I will not do it again, it's so hard to me, now I experience it.
אז יש לכם תפקיד עכשיו.
So you have a role now.
לספר את הסיפור.
To tell the story.
חיים.
As I said, I never primarily identified as a Jew, though of course I am. I see myself as a curious person. I seek ethical, intellectually consistent positions. I'm drawn to solutions. Israel is an answer to a question that has defied an answer for thousands of years. And we thought it would be easy to do what never has before been done. We thought it would be easy to protect the Jews, that this would be without challenges, without trade-offs, without tragedies. But when I see a solution this effective, I don't want to just throw it away. That is how I think. That's how I think, but what I do is I talk, I tell stories, and Chaim Yellen asked us to tell his story, and I want to thank you all for listening to it. Thank you. So there is, of course, so much to talk about, and let us consider this a treat, but one area we didn't get into are the questions of anti-Semitism in the US. So I want to bring up someone very excited to bring up, a special guest. Alex Edelman is a stand-up comic. He has strong ties and opinions about Israel. This Is Us is one of the greatest specials I've ever seen. Want to brag?
Yeah. It's called Just for Us.
Just for Us, right? I
This
know.
Is Us is a very nice television show about a family in Pittsburgh,
Wait, but what's the zombie one where? That's another like three multi-syllabic title.
The Last of Us.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
The Last of Us.
That was cool. I ate that guy's brains.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
So are you feeling, I mean, Alex, just tell us, if any of the people here have seen your show, you're keenly attuned to anti-Semitism.
Thanks.
But
Thanks, one guy. I appreciate it. Thank you. No.
Are you feeling it more acutely than you have?
You know,
in
the
your
funny
life?
thing is, I hate to do this, but I'm not, I don't really know much about anti-Semitism, and I don't talk about it often. Like, I'm genuine, like, I have always thought it's the least interesting aspect of the Jewish experience. And so, also, there are two types of anti-Semitism. And I'm actually, there's like Hanukkah anti-Semitism. Sorry to get like very Jewy, but there's Hanukkah anti-Semitism.
Oh, I think you've lost the whole room.
Yeah,
Alex.
the room's like mother. Hanukkah anti-Semitism and Purim anti-Semitism and Purim anti-Semitism. Purim's like if you're a listener or you're here and you're somehow not Jewish, Purim is like Jewish Halloween, but it sucks. And it celebrates, like most Jewish holidays, the attempted but failed annihilation of the Jewish people. And because of that, we dress up in costumes. No one fucking knows. It's a disaster. But like, Purim is about this attempted annihilation of the Jews. And Hanukkah is also about an attempted annihilation of the Jews. It's happening next week, but not the attempted annihilation. That's either 1,000 years ago or going on currently. But like, Hanukkah,
the specific one
yeah,
that was pre-scheduled.
Yeah, that's pre-scheduled. Yeah. But like Hanukkah is about attempted annihilation of the Jews. So it's about a different type of annihilation. It's about the Hellenizing of the Jews, because the Assyrians or the Seleucid Greeks, they were okay with Jews provided they stopped being Jewish. And so Dara Horn, the writer, who's written a really great book called People Love Dead Jews, which I promise you the title is somewhat tongue-in-cheek. Dara specifies these two different types of anti-Semitism. And I am far more concerned within the United States with the erasure of the Judaism of Jews than the erasure of Jews themselves. Like, I actually think that because also the two are expressly linked, right? Like, once you make being Jewish unacceptable historically, Jews themselves soon become unacceptable. And so I am less concerned with like right now you're seeing and by the way, I have deep and complicated feelings about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't agree with some of the things that you said, even though I agree with most of the things that you said. But I have noticed a certain acceptability of Jews in circles on the far left, provided they renounce all affinity, all traditional ties, anything remotely related to Israel,
right,
provided they're willing to sort of and whether or not this is correct or not, I have many friends who are anti-Zionist Jews. I think that's interesting.
So to interrupt,
sorry, please interrupt.
The concept is that we hear, well, anti-Semitism isn't anti-Zionism. Okay, stipulated, but you can't be a Semite in their good graces without being anti-Zionist.
There are certain circles that, by the way, I do believe that there are distinctions between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I don't know how useful some of those distinctions are, but I believe that you can be critical of Israel without being critical of Jews. Everybody believes that. But like, I think that, okay. But like, someone's like, no, they don't. I'm like, all right, I'm willing to. Here's the thing. I was raised very Talmudigally, so if someone's like, I disagree with you, fuck you. And I'm like, you may have a good point there, actually, you know? I'm really interested to see if you can change my strongly felt but loosely held opinion, you know? Like, but yeah, I think there are circles where like, it's okay if you're Jewish, provided you are useful, like the groups like If Not Now or Jewish Voice for Peace or any of these groups that are,
right.
So
articulate for me what would be, let's define it as an acceptable circle of pro-Israel sentiment that, let's do it this way. A big critic of Israel, an anti-Zionist, how far can they take it before you say, this is bordering on anti-Semitism?
Me personally?
Yeah, we're gonna make you the rabbi.
Depends on the day for me, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes... Because here's the thing, I actually don't trust this current Israeli government. So I think we've had the misfortune of Israel's biggest existential crisis in my lifetime occurring during the, I think, least equipped government to handle it maybe ever.
But I think maybe most Israelis agree with you.
I would say that literally, actually, an astounding portion of Israelis agree. Like, literally, it's like in the 80s. Part of me, like, doesn't understand the constitutional mechanisms that keep the guy in power. I'm like, wait, does he literally have like 2% of the country that likes him, and he's like definitely, absolutely going to be in charge for the rest of his life?
He's
like,
good at it. What can you say?
He's real. Like, that guy would burn down the country if he got to be in charge of the ashes. Like, it is absolutely the most banana situation. And every Israel, like, I don't know a single like, I went to like an anti-Netanyahu protest 3 weeks before October 7th, and there were like tens of thousands of Jews, and I felt bad for like the one pro-Netanyahu protester standing there. Like, everyone walking by was like, "Good for you, buddy," you know, way to stick in there with your maniac. But like, so yeah, sorry to answer your question, which I didn't do. I think, look, criticizing the government, especially with the huge Palestinian death toll, the unacceptable death toll, is very valid in wanting a ceasefire, depending on the shape of what that looks like. Is right. Like, I don't know where the end of it is. I would say that we're in a place where I'm less concerned about people's ideals and more concerned about their pragmatism, because whenever anyone's like, Israel shouldn't exist, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, you're an idiot. Like, because it's there and it's not going anywhere, and they have a very badly kept secret atom bomb in Dimona.
Yeah.
So they're just not gonna like, they're like, oh, we shouldn't exist. Oh, well, Tracy says we shouldn't exist, so I guess we're gonna go. We're so sorry. Will someone look after the blind museum in Halone and the hummus place in Netanya? Like, I forgot we shouldn't be here. But whenever anyone's like, the Palestinians should leave, I'm also like, that's not gonna happen. They want, so like, it's tough because like, to find people that believe that Israel should exist, but also there should be a situation where the Palestinians have some dignity and sovereignty, it's really difficult to find that. So I would say that anti-Semitism, like, that line for me is when someone goes, Israel shouldn't exist and we should figure out a way to make that happen. So I was like, well, where are they going to go? Back to Yemen? Yemen's been very clear on their position.
Yeah. the Houthis will not accept them.
By the way, the Houthis announced their attacks via music video. Have you seen any of these?
TikToking them?
I swear to God, the Houthis are like incredibly bad at social media, and they put out like sort of like rotoscoped like aha like take on me type videos. They're like, we're declaring war, and I'm like, well, yeah, genuinely. They're like they drop a single, and the single's always like, we're gonna be attacking a lot very soon. It's like so. But so, like, anti-Semitism to me is Israel shouldn't exist, and I think that there's a way that should happen. And I guess like an Islamophobic Palestinian approach would be like, we should turn Gaza into a parking lot. And I'm like, that's not gonna work. That's really not.
Well, here's another line. So my last question was, okay, what's anti-Semitic and what's not? You're a comedian. You believe and live by the First Amendment. People have speech. Are there any examples of speech or expression where you would say too far? Maybe you don't want the government involved, but you say to yourself, as much as I am for saying what you want to say, I can't countenance this.
I'm always like, I'm a free speech radical, but occasionally I'll watch a special or see a comic. And by the way, one of the things that I love about the Comedy Cellar is that sometimes I come here and see stuff I really don't agree with, or I see stuff that I really feel challenged by. And I just love that about this place, because I think it's important.
If it's in the spirit and ethos of
are you talking about speech generally or comedians?
No, I'm not talking about comedians. If you want to cite an example of a comedian, that might be interesting. But
no. Why would I pick a fight with someone who's absolutely more famous than me, given that he's Dave Chappelle, right? Like, why would I say anything? Why would I out myself? Oh shit. But yeah, obviously speech converge on hate speech, but also like a lot of these arguments, like, do I really want to spend my life arguing about whether like someone from like the University of Wisconsin who doesn't really know what the river to the sea means, whether or not that's like a genocidal intent? Like, it's a stupid semantic argument that is like, that really doesn't serve us now. And I'm really like sort of disturbed by this like new pearl clutching, this like insane sanctimony over whether or not like what someone says on a street in the middle of like some American city with no connection to the conflict, like whether or not fighting about that or whether or not, like whether or not that means something. I'm more disturbed, and this is sort of hopefully this will, I haven't spoken about this publicly. I barely speak about this in private. So like, I'm sorry, this is like a little mealy mouth, but like, I see in our discourse a reflection of what's happening on the ground, which is a sort of cycle of erasure where we continually seek to erase each other's humanity because we are so frustrated at the circumstances. Like someone puts up a poster and then someone tries to erase that other side's humanity by tearing down the poster. And then someone tries to get that person fired for tearing, down the poster. And then someone tries to shame the person who got the person fired, tries to get them fired. And so like the cycle continues. Yeah. And it's an insane reflection of what's happening in the Middle East, but it's played out on our very pathetic, wimpy, Twitter accounts and Instagram accounts. And like, when I see it as someone who has a deep connection to the area and a deep connection to the people and a deep connection to the situation that goes back to when I lived there as a child during the Second Intifada, it feels really fucking stupid to me. And I understand why people have those arguments.
Oh, you're saying it feels stupid of you?
It feels stupid to me.
Okay.
And I understand why those arguments are important, and I understand that there's a larger PR war, but like ultimately, as lame as this sounds, like very little of this actually matters. Like very little of this sort of semantic argument actually matters. Like they got a ceasefire for a few days, and Hamas broke it, and then they went right back to the thing. And like something actually is going to have to change in that region. Like something on the ground is going to have to change, and all the conjecture and all the speculation.
It's not going to come from a slogan.
It's not going to come from words. It's not going to come from TikTok. Yeah. And like you point out, someone's like, Bin Laden had some good, someone's like, Bin Laden had some good points. And I'm like, well, you're probably not the most effective leader in terms of like bringing the two people together. Not going to be able to do it. Do you want to ask the last question?
I want to ask the last question.
Sure. Sorry.
No, it's
all right. These people are like, well, this isn't fucking funny. I'm like, yeah, no, I know.
As a wordsmith, okay, this is the penultimate question. Just
funny.
You're maybe on this one. As a wordsmith, if they changed the slogan and reversed it, so if it was Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, wouldn't it sound worse? Like that's the
all the slogans sound bad, man. Every single one. I went to like a Free Palestine rally in San Francisco. And by the way, if you don't know what my show's about, I went to this meeting of white nationalists in Queens like 5-6 years ago. And I sat there for an hour, and eventually one of them was like, sorry, but this guy's Jew. I'm like, yeah, I'm a Jew. And it's like, that's what the show's about. And so I went to this pro-Palestine thing, and someone recognized me. He's like, Alex Edelman? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, you're not that familiar with my work, probably. And I was like... But I went, and someone's like global, and like one of the chants about globalizing the Intifada. And for me, that has very traumatic meaning, because I lived in Israel during a time where like you'd go to a Sbarro's on a Tuesday, and then a week later, I was 10 years old, and I was like, can we go back to that Sbarro's? And they're like, no. And I threw a tantrum because they couldn't explain to me that someone had blown up the Sbarro.
Yeah.
And so like, but that may mean something different to somebody else. So like, yeah, the words matter, but it's not of prime importance.
So this is the real last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sacha Baron Cohen, he has to change his makeup when he does characters. You can't just keep going to these rallies and think that you'll slip in under the radar.
I absolutely can.
Oh, man.
There are lots of Jews at these rallies.
So here's my last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
As a gimlet-eyed observer of the world.
Gimlet. That's actually on my driver's license. Under eye color, it says gimlet.
And that's why you're always arrested for a DUI.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you're that. On the other hand, you're an artist. You have to be open and sensitive. Has this been changing your... So, it's the cynicism versus the openness. Has this fundamentally changed what you thought America was?
Yeah, I think it has. I think all of us, by the way, I've always been really touchy about anti-Semitism as a topic for public discussion, because like some anti-Semitism is bullshit. Like when they're like, there's a swastika in the New York Times crossword puzzle. I'm like, do you know how hard it is to make a crossword puzzle? Like, and you know anything about making crossword puzzles, you're shocked that every single one of them is in shape like a swastika. Like it's the most efficient way.
There are like 3 templates.
They should get an exemption. It should be just swastikas for the New York Times crossword. But so I think it's been a really tough time where lots of young Jews have looked around and been like, oh my God, there is real anti-Semitism in our discourse, in the way that... And by the way, sometimes anti-Semitism shows up with the correct moral framework behind it, but anti-Semitism is excused as part of... Like, you should be horrified by the deaths of tens of thousands of Palestinians. What sort of monster would you be if you saw... Like you said, I only walked in halfway through what you were discussing, but like... What sort of monster would it be if you saw a hospital with like kids screaming and amputating, no anesthesia? You're like, not too bad. Like that would be a really ugly human situation. But it doesn't. There's one person for that. Yeah, it must have been. But look, it is really tough because we're caught in this vector of like, what's the right thing to do? What's the effective thing to do? How do you keep Israelis safe in this unique situation where it's the only? Sorry, not to get off track. All I'm saying is, anti-Semitism is something that I always thought was for grandmothers and certain people in various Jewish organizations to look after and complain about. And I have seen over the last couple of weeks a very real... I don't know if it's gotten more. I don't know if it's always been there and we just haven't been paying attention. I don't know if this is but I have seen it. I've heard it casually from my friends. And I think it's changed my perception of what being a Jew in this country means. And I think it has underscored certain responsibilities I never felt before. And I think it has informed, it has animated various ways of thinking I never hoped to tap into. I was like literally going through my Instagram close friends being like, he would hide me. She wouldn't hide me. They definitely... Well, they would hide me, but they would brag about it, so I'd be caught. They'd hide me. That person would sign up to turn me in, you know, like... And it's been really... And also watching other Jews talk certain way. I don't know. It's just been... Yeah, I think it's been an eye-opener, and lots of Jews have been calling and texting each other, being like, oh my God, we are not safe here. So yeah, I hate to say that out loud in public for the first time, but yeah, that has been a really, really tough thing to reckon with. So,
well, Alex, I think you articulated what a lot of people are feeling, and I want to thank you for doing so and continuing to do so in the unique way that you do. Thanks for having me. Alex Edelman, thank you very much. And thank you all very much. To donate to Kibbutz Be'eri, this is a QR code. You can aim your phone at it, and donations are open. Good night.